Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
And this is Gender, a Wider Lens, a podcast dedicated to the shifting concepts around gender in our contemporary culture.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we seek to open up the discourse around this hot-button issue.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens.
Howdy, Stella.
How's it going, Sasha? How are you?
I'm well. We are here to recap some of our kind of most insightful and interesting takeaways from the Bigger Picture Conference in Lisbon, Portugal, which was several weeks now. And it was a very, very interesting experience. I think we have lots of things to say about it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to Helen Joyce afterwards, and she said, she was at the first conference in Killarney, and she said back then it was just like, here we are, if you follow me. We are gender critical people and we have something to say. It was kind of, you know what I mean? It was just after COVID, and it was like our first coming together in a serious way of all the different disciplines. And she said this time, she missed Denver. She was not Denver, but then she came to Lisbon, and she said it's so much more structured, and we're such a bigger world, if you follow me, that we could have a whole sociological section, we could have a whole psychological, we could have a law section, we could have educational. And, of course, she's so incisive that she could see the big changes that now we're in 2024. We really have moved as a movement into, I think we're really taking our place in the world as a very legitimate position to take on this complex issue. And that I thought that was a really good reflection of what happened in Lisbon.
Yeah. And I mean, along similar lines, a lot of people who showed up, first of all, it was in Portugal. And so I was kind of originally expecting it would be mostly European attendees, which of course there were tons. I mean, I met people from so many European countries, but also from all over the place. We had people from Australia. We had someone from China. We had parents from the US, people from New Zealand. So it was remarkable. But something that I kept hearing is, Japan. I kept hearing this couldn't have happened a few years ago. So that kind of touches on what Helen was saying, that this has really grown and become a much more, I mean, there's so much support for these ideas and these concepts. And I think people are feeling like there's more scaffolding and bravery to come and attend a conference and speak. I mean, we had so many brilliant speakers. And I remember in my mind, there was a shift that I noticed in Denver when Michael Schellenberger with Environmental Progress released the WPATH files. And I thought to myself, wow, Michael Schellenberger has nothing to do with gender, but he's noticing something foul is going on. And we saw this again on a much bigger scale. Lots of sociologists, people from different kind of backgrounds, academics, humanities people, all taking interest in this question. So it's no longer just a bunch of frantic therapists and parents who are worried about ROGD kids. It's now like all of society is starting to notice something massive going on. And I think that's pretty obvious, broadly speaking, when you look at the types of news coverage and so on and so forth. But it was really reflected in person in a tangible way at the conference in Lisbon.
Yeah, and there was speakers there who hadn't spoken publicly about gender, but were expert in their own field. So, a great hero of mine is Frank Faridy, and it was a real, highlight for me. Like I used to read his books in the early 2000s, and I adore.
Tell us who he is. He's a sociologist.
He's a sociologist, and he wrote a book called Paranoid Parenting in, I think, 2006. And it was really, it was pivotal for me when I read it, because it was kind of very much reflecting what was going on in society about parenting. And I was becoming a parent, and I was like, what is going on? And he was the first person who said, no, this is societal. There's an undermining of parents happening. and it's been happening for years, and he really knows his stuff about society. Now, some people will consider him very controversial, like, you know what I mean? And I was kind of happy that we had controversial figures. Well, you know what I mean? I didn't want to have people. I'm very wary of echo chambers, and that we all agree and we're all great, and you made a great point. No, you made a great point. So it wasn't that. It really wasn't.
Wait, who talks like that? That's not us. It can't possibly be us.
Good point, Sasha.
I disagree with you, Stella. That's not correct. Okay.
Yeah, so it was interesting to feel ruffled feathers, if you follow me, quite often during the conference. That people sitting up going, I'm not sure if I agree with this, but I had started the conference with a kind of a speech about how, you know, we are going to ruffle feathers. We're not going to all agree, and we are the better for it, because that's how you come out about better outcomes when we don't agree. So, like, Frank Furedi hadn't spoke before, but one thing he said that has stayed in my mind till today, and I've thought of it so many times and quoted him since. During his speech, he said, because his presentation was about why is the obsession that the EU has on normalizing trans. And it was a kind of a really strong speech, because he's based in Brussels and he's all about the EU. He's all about European Union and the policies and around that. And what he said that stuck in my mind was, he said, if you're a dance group in Croatia or you're building a road in Poland, when you go for funding, in the application they say, and what are you doing for gender? And so, of course, when you fill in the application, you then say, oh, well, we'll have lanyards and maybe we'll have gender neutral toilets. We're looking for funding, so they're looking for this. And that's how you get institutional capture, if you follow me. That like, you know, dance groups, and somebody put up their hand and they commented that they were putting in something like the times of a railway station. You know what I mean? The kind of railway times, that was their job. And they were asked, what are you doing for gender? If you follow me, because
Yeah.
And that's how it goes in. It goes in through the funding question, because then when you're replying to your refunders, you're saying, I did this and I did that and the other, and this is what I did for gender. Thank you very much. Send me your funding. And that's how institutional capture has happened all across the world. And he nailed it, because he's on the outside seeing these questions. So that was something he said. And the second thing that kind of, this gave me the chills, to be honest, was he said, you know, there is a kind of a very definitive dark eye effectively being shone on, you know, extreme climate change activists, gender criticals, and other what are considered extremists in the world from the EU. So that they're lumping gender criticals into kind of almost an Antifa, you know, Extinction Rebellion kind of gender critical.
The opposite of Antifa, but like, yeah, I totally
you
see
know
what
what I
you're saying.
mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, my point is extremism, I suppose. Extremism is what it's been lumped in as. And it's not extremism, it's reality. And so that was frightening, but also enlightening. That really jumped out at me about Frank's talk. You hadn't heard of him before, had you?
No, I mean, he was on my radar. I don't know how he came across my radar. Maybe it was from talking with you, but I had some of his books on my list of like, oh, this is something I really, really want to read. And everything that he said in his talk, I found incredibly compelling and insightful. And then just through like kind of water cooler talk between sessions or something, I realized that some people find him to be pretty extreme. And so it was very interesting having, you know, different perspectives reflected in the audience and the speakers. But I thought it was very fascinating. I think everything he said was really moving. And I just want to touch on what you mentioned regarding institutional capture. I think this kind of ties in with the way prioritizing diversity above competence creates these problems. Like if you are hiring somebody who's, let's say, a clock displayer, like displaying the clocks, if you're not selecting that company based on their skill at clock display, you're inevitably prioritizing other things. And so the competence in that particular job is deprioritized. And it's so interesting because as my own thinking about what does real justice look like, how do societies work effectively, I've really started to understand that prioritizing competence and excellence is the best way to give a society a chance of being excellent, of being productive and effective, and like having leadership. So it's interesting to think about all these institutions taking their main MOU and like de-emphasizing it to emphasize diversity quotas. Like that's kind of a recipe for mediocrity, I guess. And I never would have thought myself to say this when I was in my 20s, because I was very much like, give people a leg up or this or that. But I don't know, this is veering off, and we'll get back to Genspect. But as somebody who now, has my own practice, I've realized like being the most competent you can be at the one thing that you're doing is much more important than trying to get a leg up because I'm an Egyptian woman or because I'm a small business, like whatever. It's so interesting how just like excellence at your thing is so much more important than these other things.
Well, I think it's very relevant to the conversation that this emphasis on other things rather than the job in hand, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a clockmaker. Well, that's the problem, because when people should be just good at teaching if they're teachers, and now they're being asked to be, affirmative counselors, etc. So I think it really is very relevant. But I do think that it's important we highlight the fact that diversity and, EDI, DEI, whatever you want to call it, has really impacted, I think, the gender question. I think it really has. But another person who kind of stood out to me as a new speaker, the new to the world of gender, was Matthias Desmet.
Yes.
And he's a new hero of mine. Like I didn't know him very well. He talks about mass formation. And it's a kind of a psychological theory, and it's very interesting. It's about how in times of when there's a lot of kind of pervasive low-level anxiety in the world, if there's a lot of people feeling anxious, the likelihood of them to hang on to one thing and to kind of almost kind of collect behind one point, whether it might be, for him, he used the example of COVID. For somebody else, they might use the example of trans. Somebody else might use the example of whatever else. You know what I mean? That there's been mass formations about lots of different things. The Red Guard, China's Red Guard would be a big mass formation. And that we do it during anxious times. And we do it, he said, and this was very interesting, he'd studied mass formations, Soviet Russia and things like that. And what he found was when people stopped speaking up, when people went underground, is when it became very dangerous. And that felt like very important information. That he finished his talk. It was a strong talk, but he finished his talk with the need to speak the truth. And then he said, it makes you stronger when you speak the truth. It weakens you when you don't speak the truth. You feel weaker and you don't feel as able in life. It's actually cutting away it's very corrosive. And so I found that really inspiring. I thought, wow, just to finish with, the only way out is to speak the truth. It felt really powerful.
Yeah. And he's pretty remarkable. He got up there, no notes, no script. He just stood at the front of the stage and just started explaining the difference between totalitarianism and tyranny. And I thought, wow, this is quite out there. We're starting with this. Like, this is huge. Where is this going? And it was actually very interesting because he said most people misunderstand the difference between these two types of like formations. And then he goes on to explain, like you said, how people can rally behind an idea. And I thought this looks like it could be tipping into a kind of an extreme talk. Where is this going? And then, like you said, the lysis almost was when he said, the answer to this is speaking from the heart. And I thought, wow, like this is so, and I felt like it was very in line with the talk that I gave, because I talked about communication strategies and just heartfelt, honest communication. And it seems so simple, but it's such an important antidote to all this kind of mind pretzel language forcing that happens in kind of the radical trans ideology world.
I thought it was really interesting that he was so political and large, large picture. And he was specifically talking about telling the truth, and something like sincere truth, something like that. He had some sort of phrase. And then you would come along earlier, and you talked about something like heartfelt honesty. Was that what you used?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was like, wow, two completely different people coming from completely different walks of life, landing in such a similar place. And I couldn't have agreed more. I have to say, Sasha, though, you know the way me and you are talking so often, and we know each other so well. And I listened to your talk and thought, well, I learned a lot. I didn't expect. I thought, oh yes, Sasha, I know all that, yeah. And then I ended up going, oh, that's very interesting. Oh, that's very interesting.
Oh, that's lovely to
I didn't
hear.
expect that. Yeah.
Layers of an onion, deep layers of the onion. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was going to be like, tell me something I don't know, Sasha. Go on. But it wasn't at all.
What was
really
the parts that were surprising to you? I'm curious.
Well, you broke it down, and you were talking about how to kind of reach the RGD youth. And what you did was you broke it down in steps. You know what I mean? You were very clear-minded about how you would do it. And I thought that is the way. That is the way to talk. That is the way to communicate with parents, because parents are facing this new bolt from the blue. And this is such a helpful exercise to break it down into steps. And I thought it was really powerful. But tell our
that's
listeners.
Nice. Well, I mean, just one of the things that I started with is kind of describing my patient zero, who I met in the context of working in a middle school. And some of the things that I wanted to highlight are that, when I met this young woman, she hadn't been questioning her gender. We built a relationship just based on like some of her gripes with the school and teachers and not having a lot of friendships. So we had already a solid relationship. In addition to that, I happened to start our school's GSA. And so I had a lot of credibility as an adult who knows a lot about gender and sexuality. And then when she started to question her gender about a year after I met her, she trusted me, and already we had a relationship, so I could just nudge and guide her in a direction away from like binding, for example. I discouraged her from using a binder. I told her it's okay to be a girl who likes anime. Like I kind of talk about these things. And then when I started my practice in 2016, I was a little bit surprised at how much harder it is to work with gender questioning kids when you don't have that long-standing relationship, when maybe they suspect that you're a bad therapist that their parents picked, and there's all this defensiveness built up from the beginning. So I learned that the strategies I used with my patient zero are not going to work when you are meeting a kid for the first time who's 2 years into a trans identity, who's been like reading Reddit posts forever. You have actually to take a very different tact. So that's what I end up outlining in my talk, like these kind of 11 principles. There are probably more, maybe, I could distill it into less, but 11 principles that I think are really useful in communicating with gender questioning kids. So I'm glad that you found some new things in there.
It's a credit to you that you say that about your patient zero, that it was harder when it went out into the world, when you went out into the world with it. Because that patient zero, I've kind of read enough about social contagion to know how important patient zero is in every contagion there is, if you follow me. And your patient zero, you worked with them, and then you found, there's more layers in patient 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what many people do is patient zero is the template, and off I go forevermore. And, it's a credit to you that you didn't. You complexified, if you know what I mean. But so often that patient zero can be so pivotal to a clinician's understanding. Forevermore.
I remember when we talked to DeVries, this is what happened. She had this patient zero who was biologically female, who was just terrified of puberty coming. And DeVries locked in this idea that, well, we got to stop the puberty. I mean, it was a remarkable conclusion to draw from that interaction. I'm laughing, but it's not funny, but it is so unbelievable. But anyway, for her, I don't want to put words in DeVries' mouth, but that patient zero set a template that her thinking was, okay, if puberty's scary, we got to stop the puberty. That was almost like the linear computer way of thinking about it. I mean, it's remarkable. But anyway, and tell me, I guess, Well, what do you want to think about that or say about that?
Remarkably familiar. Do you know what I mean? These days, that is very much this kind of categorical, frameworky kind of thing. Well, what I was going to say was, when I heard your talk, and then the next morning I heard, was it the next morning or was it that morning? That morning, I think Stephen Levine was speaking.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had talked, he's such a great addition to any conference, but he spoke about the betrayal that parents felt. And, you know, it was so appropriate. You know, it was so understanding of what has happened to parents.
Yeah.
And, you know, their sense of betrayal. I don't think we've spoken enough about that. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and something that he's touched on before, which, like, I just want to say, I think in a way you and I don't know if we've gotten spoiled, that's not the right term, but we're so connected with so many thoughtful individuals who describe what's going on with clarity. And every now and then, if I pop into like a WPATH webinar or like some sort of gender conference, you just realize how, in my opinion, how distorted and warped and like inhumane some of their beliefs are. And so to hear Stephen Levine say these things, sometimes I just want to like express gratitude for how lucky we are to be surrounded by such brilliant people. But something he always says is that the parents' worries today will become the children's future worries. And that kind of loops in with this idea of betrayal, like the idea that all the adults are supposed to be thinking about the child's future worries, but nobody is except the parents. Yeah. And it's just remarkable to think about that. I heard a comedian called Jimmy Carr say something like, we're being kind at the wrong time scale. And when I think about what Stephen says, that perfectly ties in. Like, yeah, okay, you can be kind now, but what about the future kindness or like the future well-being? And of course, parents are worried about their child's future more than anybody else could possibly be.
Yeah, yeah.
We want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Genspect and Therapy First. Genspect is an international organization committed to fostering a healthy approach to sex and gender. The team and members of Genspect strive to promote high-quality, evidence-based care for gender nonconforming individuals. Genspect is pleased to offer a non-medicalized approach to gender with their recently published Gender Framework, and they continue to hold conferences around the world. Visit genspect.org to learn more.
Therapy First is a non-profit worldwide professional association of mental health providers who view psychotherapy as the appropriate first-line treatment for gender dysphoria. Therapy First supports psychotherapists working with gender dysphoric youth and young adults and offers public education on mental health and psychotherapy. Visit therapyfirst.org to learn more.
Now back to the show.
Another part of the psychology section was, you know, Bob Withers, where he said something along the lines of, why are you engaging me in psychotherapy when you want to change your body? I love Bob. You know, he's a Jungian analyst, and he tends to nail it. And it was such a great question. And, you know, then Marcus Evans gave a great, you know, analysis too. There was a lot on the psychology section. I thought we've really upped our game, I felt, as psychology, like really, really. Yeah.
Totally. There were some amazing talks. I have to say, Jaco's talk was so brilliant and
that's
so
just
insightful.
For people. That's Jaco Van Zyl from Critical Therapy Antidote. Go ahead, though. That was
no, I mean, it was so deep and yet so clear and simple. Like, sometimes all this gender stuff can be really esoteric, but man, he just talked about reality and the limits of reality and trying to skirt the pain of living in reality. And it was just such a wise talk. And he was a really effective speaker too. So, I mean, we don't want to leave anybody out, but we just have to say so many brilliant talks and from new people, like people who you may not have heard, but they've been working in gender for a while now. So I think you were saying some videos will be trickling out on YouTube chronologically, right? So like right now, people can go to the Genspect YouTube and see at least some of these talks.
Yeah, very, very important to say we're trying to do it chronologically, because in other conferences, we got a lot of contact from people saying, I'm still waiting for my video to come out. We were like, no, we're strictly following a process. We're not favoriting anybody, because, you know, otherwise you'd be all over the place, because one person's favorite is another person's, you know, not, you know, worst, you know, talk. I liked the fact that we had, you know, kind of elder from Iceland. You know, we had kind of people like Jesper from Denmark, who spoke about Denmark and what, you know, his 3 questions and things like that. He was delighted later on that you gave those questions to Peter Boghossian.
Oh, we'll tell that story later. Yes.
That was really good. But Elder gave this kind of shocking snapshot of what has happened to Iceland. And it felt a little bit like what had happened to Ireland. You know what I mean? It's just a small country just getting captured ideologically while they're not taking it seriously. If you follow me, they're just painting rainbows everywhere. You know what I mean? It was a really shocking. At one point, he had a picture of transgender Jesus up on the screen. I was like, what am I watching here? Like, it did feel like Matthias Desmet's kind of analysis of society was really relevant at that point. It was like, wow, what has happened in Iceland? But tell us about it didn't feel like that.
And before I tell that story, just something you said reminded me, next to the elevators, I was talking to Helen Joyce, and she kind of made this comment. So many of the talks at this conference actually helped me to understand other talks at the conference. So you're right, like hearing Matthias Desmet talk about mass formation put in context what Elder's presentation was about. And Helen was saying, like, so many of these talks are helping us connect the dots with other talks. And I don't know if that was intentional, but that's really something fascinating that happened during the conference. So just kudos to you guys for your selection of speakers.
Nice. Well, it's the speakers. They were just amazing. I think so many people who are extremely knowledgeable in their subject are now emboldened to speak up. So we're getting the cream of the crop of each field. You know what I mean? We who are questioning this issue, and they are brave speakers, but generally very, very expert in their field. I did think, I noticed, you know, a few people saying I didn't quite understand the pain of the parents. And whenever people say that to me, I'm always surprised, going, wow, because I suppose I've almost grown up in this world with the pain of the parents, and so have you.
Yeah,
but quite a few people said that to me. The bar later on was great crack, but then we were talking to so many people, but quite a few people said that to me, and I thought, isn't it astonishing? People who are years in gender world.
I know. Jesper was really moved by some of the parents. I mean, he even had a few moments of getting quite tearful. And I do think you and I have we've been inundated by those narratives for so long that I don't think, I mean, we might be a little desensitized, but he was so moved and heartbroken at some of the things happening to families. So that was remarkable. And I do think that's what's so valuable about coming to a conference like this. I mean, if anybody's listening and thinking about, should I go next time? You should go, because you're bringing in people who have very different reasons for being involved in this subject. And like, I want to tell the Peter Boghossian story, but like another talk, I just have to say, Sarah Fillmore talking about the battleground for children's capacity was amazing. She's a barrister, right? She's an attorney.
Yeah, and she's an example of the cream of the crop. Now, there's a brain for you.
Cream of the crop. And she started off by saying, you know, I was going to try to be really hopeful and nice in my talk, but I'm feeling really inspired by Bev Jackson and some of these other people. I'm just going to let it rip because I'm going to talk about what's really going on. And she kind of went on to break down all of the ways that on a legal and institutional front, we have a battle ahead of us, I think, to some degree. Yeah. So that was an amazing talk. I mean, so many people who are so inspiring. But okay, and
just before you talk about Peter Boghossian, I want to say, when we had the Peter Boghossian, it was towards the end of the conference, and I looked around and went, oh, we need a bit more of this. Because I'm so intense, obviously, and I'm so like, get the really intense people in. And it's like you're getting pummeled. It's like, you know what I mean? You're getting pummeled by intensity. Then Peter Boghossian completely changed the atmosphere. He completely changed everything when he did his talk. And I had no idea. He was explaining to me his idea. I was like, what? Okay.
Yeah, you kept saying, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Oh, it was good. Okay. So here's what he did. First of all, everybody should go watch Peter Boghossian's Spectrum Street Epistemology, which is a tongue twister that I somehow nailed. Magic.
And then they should learn jujitsu.
Yeah, and then they should learn jujitsu. But no, I mean, he's obviously he's a former philosophy professor at Portland State, I believe, and he's been making these amazing videos just about things like thinking and the Socratic method and this street epistemology, where he asks people to basically clarify their thinking about various beliefs they hold. And what he did for his talk is he said, I tried to go over to WPATH. They didn't want me there. But what I'm going to try to do.
Oh, just correction. We formally invited WPATH to come over to Peter Boghossian and take part in a strong man, good faith interview on stage with Peter. We formally invited them, and they
That's even more interesting now.
He phoned me about a month before with this idea. And I was like, yeah, okay, great, yeah, because I loved that idea. Of course, wouldn't it be great? But he says, but I've got more of an idea. If and when they don't say no, I've a second plan. And that was what he enacted. So carry on.
Oh, first of all, that would have been so interesting if somebody came.
Yeah,
but anyway.
But loads of delegates from WPATH came. There was loads in the audience, and they came up after, and they've spoken to me since, and they've emailed me since, and they are unhappy with the cult-like atmosphere in WPATH. There's no doubt about it. There's no room for dissension, and it's completely focused on technicians. It's like, how do we address the problems? Nothing about should we be doing it, and everything about how do we address the problems.
Yeah, you talked about that, the technician piece. Can you say that? And then poor Peter is getting bumped to later. But this is actually really important. Say more about that.
It's almost like, there's an awful lot of people in WPATH who might be gender dysphoric themselves, and they address trans issues as something technical to be overcome. With and an acceptance that, like, for example, the dreadful results of phalloplasty is something that they have to suffer, and that they just need to kind of constantly tweak, just a little bit better. And, I know because some people who were at the WPATH talks told me that Marcy Bowers at WPATH, while we were in Lisbon, she gave a talk on how she didn't, no longer recommended vaginoplasties and was now recommending vulvoplasties. The point being, and it was funny because Lisa Marciano, the Jungian who always sees the metaphor, said, now that's a metaphor for what's going on. No depth. Sorry. But yeah, I thought that was great. But yeah, sorry, it is very
I
funny.
cannot get over that. I need a moment to process that. Wow, she just came up with that on the spot.
Straight away. She
Drink whatever kind of coffee she's drinking. That's genius. Okay, go on.
So Marcy Bowers was kind of addressing the problem. We shouldn't laugh because there's tragedies happening, but sometimes you have to laugh because it's so dreadful. And, that, like Marcy Bowers said, vaginoplasties, they were no longer the preferred treatment. And now she was her preferential treatment was vulvoplasties, as in no depth, not usable, but So that's what some people who had been to the WPATH, conference that morning were telling me that Marcy Bowers, and that is reflective of what we're up against with WPATH. They're not interested in the conceptual, but should we be doing something? Should we be offering false promises? Should we be kind of carrying into society something that is, kind of based upon gender dysphoria, which is deep distress? Yeah. Or should we be looking at it in other ways, and should be looking at the wider implications for society and things like that? They're not interested at all in that. They're just saying technically tweak.
Yes.
And so, but I was very glad that those WPATH delegates did come over, and, they were very interesting.
But
let's talk about
so Peter's plan B was, he said, I'm gonna do my best to steel man the argument coming from the WPATH side, and I'm gonna give like a 5-minute explanation using citations and references for like why pediatric gender medicine is basically a laudable goal and industry. So he references Judith Butler and all these different people from queer theory or whatever. And then he said, he went through his little spiel. And then he said, now I'm going to take questions from the audience, make it short. You're not allowed to go on a monologue. You're not allowed to just like tirade. You can say a short statement or ask me a short question to try and make me change my mind or poke holes in this argument. Now, this is really where the energy in the room lit up, because you have some of the most passionate and knowledgeable humans on the planet in this room. I mean, everybody was like, where's Helen Joyce? Where's Helen Joyce? Like everyone just... So then people started trying to ask questions to poke holes in the thinking. And he would respond. I mean, whenever this one goes out on YouTube, like this is a must watch. It's so good. And he did a really good job. However, I have to say, Helen and I were kind of joking together. I don't think he understands fully the belief systems behind the medical piece. Like, I think he gets some of the queer theory things, but there was a lot that I said, oh, I could have answered that question. I feel confident that even though I don't agree with these ideas, I could make an airtight case for pediatric gender medicine using the queer theory ideas with a lot of confidence. Like, I think I understand their arguments very, very well. But anyway, it was fun and fascinating, and people were so alive. Like, everybody wanted to ask a question. So that was the most energy that I saw in the room, I think, for the whole weekend. It was like,
and it was a revelation to me, because I thought, oh, we definitely need more of that, because it was so there was so much other kind of quite heavy things. But had you and Helen been up there, done the same thing that Peter Boghossian did, and you and Helen were the ones, that would have been, I think, incredibly good, if you follow me.
I'd love to do that. I think that would be a super interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
And this is where the kind of Jesper piece comes in. So Jesper, who was on our show, has this brilliant 3 questions that you can ask to basically help people understand why pediatric gender medicine is a bad idea. And so he had already left. He had to leave early. So when I got the mic, I said, I'm asking these questions on behalf of Jesper. And they were something like, part A and part B. Can you guarantee that a child's gender identity will be fixed in the long term? And if not, is it okay to sacrifice the health of some children who may change their mind in order to transition children who don't change their mind? And so I don't remember how Peter answered. Do you remember?
No, but I do remember Jesper's delight when he was messaging me. He said, I heard Sasha use my questions on Peter. So that was lovely.
He messaged me too.
Oh, did he? Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting that when you kind of bring some lightness into it, we can all laugh. And I think we need to laugh more. I think we need to. I was thrilled that we had very much, it felt to me like very Irish nights in the bars, where everybody was talking with everybody. It was a little bit raucous, but it was fun. You know what I mean? We were talking, everybody was talking with everybody, and we were moving around a lot. And it's very convivial to see this. There was, a real, I think a sad section was on the Sunday morning when we did the kind of the families impacted. And so Lynn gave a beautiful piece, and she's been on our podcast talking about life after. She's been estranged and life after. And that was lovely, but it set the tone of, it was sad. And Jude Hunter, such a powerful speaker about, her child and what the difficulties of the families. But for me, probably, I think the presentation that most certainly moved me to tears, was Emma Thomas. And she was speaking as a child of a transitioner, and she's my age. So she's assimilated it. She's figured it out. She knows what went on. Her dad transitioned when she was an adolescent, and she's a teacher, and she has such care for children. You know what I mean? You can see she just cares for children. And she gave these clips, and I found them harrowing, of, fathers with their, daughters, and the father was transitioning. And that was a place, I think that ruffled feathers as well, because I think a lot of people could have lived without watching it and without hearing it. I think it was distressing and disturbing. And I'm really glad that she's speaking. It feels like they're the last cohort, if you follow me.
Yeah.
There's like Shannon Trace spoke about, the trans widows, the parents spoke, but the children have transitioners. There's not many. It's only Emma that I know that is speaking up about that.
I got quite sick during the conference, and you can hear it on Sunday night in our podcast.
Yeah.
So Sunday morning, I was in bed and I was on a lot of medication. So I was
Where are
so
you now,
sad.
Sasha?
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know if you could tell during the recording, but I was like a little out of it.
I
But
did.
anyway,
Yeah.
I missed Emma's talk, which I was really disappointed, but I definitely will watch it when it comes out. Tell me about the clips. I'm just curious, and I'm sure the audience is too.
Sasha, it's gonna blow your mind, but it's also going to fill you with sadness and also a slight panicky feeling of we've got to do something about this. So she spoke about her own, I know she put a lot of time into this talk. This was a carefully curated talk, and she had clips. There were video clips that she had chosen specifically, and she talked about, when you're going through puberty as a girl and when your dad is then going through transition, how much the dad wants to be involved. Like it's the dad is kind of almost selling to the young girl, this is a similar process. And then she had, children of transitioners. So these were kind of girls who were on places like TikTok, and the dad and the girl were wearing the same dresses. And it was kind of like the dad was talking, frankly, in a very narcissistic way about how they were. And then the girl would be just there, kind of maybe a little bit overweight, kind of showing her dress, but clearly just kind of, and she talked about the loyalty people have for their parents and how much we go along with the family culture. And if we're told that this is okay, then we think this is okay. And then she'd show another clip of maybe another girl with she just really outlined the divided loyalties and the tendency for the children to roll in with the family culture. And the family culture can be sometimes very unhealthy. And she managed to do it without getting overwrought, without getting emotional, but she packed a punch. Was the place where I teared up, and I have heard so many stories. I don't tear up as often as I used to, but this was the point where I felt like a sense of panic that this needs attention, this needs policies, this needs thought, and organized thought around it. So that was, for me, that was the highlight of the conference, because I learned so much, and it was a big event.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, something that comes up a lot in our work is the different roles that moms and dads play when their kids are questioning their gender. And there's, obviously this is not the case all the time. I know so many incredibly dedicated dads who have made it their mission to connect with their children and try to help them. But it is noticeable that a lot of times the invested parent is the mom, and the dad is, when things are going okay, he's kind of taking direction from the mom. He's supportive of the mom. And sometimes there's a complete disengagement. And so I just think it's interesting because we recognize the complex role that dads often play in this. And then on the other hand, you think about Emma's story, and the father was himself in the midst of this. And then she had to kind of play along as a child. I mean, it's a remarkable thing to think about when we start to consider the importance of fathers in a daughter's life. But what happens when the father is transitioning? It's just such an underexplored, sensitive and vulnerable experience for kids.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to go with it. This is an uncharted territory for me. I feel like I have a lot of knowledge about different aspects of gender, but this is an area I don't know anything about, really.
There you go. That's what I felt. And I was kind of looking around going, God, we have to do something. You know what I mean? It was like, whoa. But one other talk that really stood out to me, and I'm so pleased it did, was Alex Capo. I've had a kind of a virtual relationship with, we're friends online, And I've such regard for him. He's a director of the Charlton, school. He spoke on our podcast about how, there was they got into a mess with gender. It's a school of 42 children, but loads of them started to socially transition. And then myself and himself worked together. It was a long process. He's a very thoughtful man. He's very psychologically oriented. And then he brought in a culture of desistance in the school. And so he gave a really good, I think that talk is probably the most helpful talk, because parents can send that to schools. Schools can listen to Alex talk in a very succinct way, in a step-by-step way about how we approached it. And he was quite funny, because he was saying, what reminded me of it was when you said how the mothers are all invested. And he described how when his own kids were in school, and his wife was talking to the school, and his wife was saying, he was talking about how, he said, I don't want to be sexist, but I have noticed the mothers tend to lead the way in school talks. And then he says, with my own family, we go to school and, I'm the father of the kids, and my wife just takes over saying, you've got to do this and you've got to do that and you've got to do the other. And then she'd say, he's a director of school and he agrees, and he'd go, yeah, listen to her. And I thought, that is it. Alex Caper, who knows everything about the psychology of a young person in school, is going, listen to my wife. Because there's something about the mothers. I thought he really gave it in a really lovely way, that there's something about the connection of the mothers from the beginning, because they hold the child, that they lead the way in the emotional understanding. Not always, there's many exceptions, we all know that.
Yeah.
But he was really funny about that. You know what I mean? I was just imagining his wife, yeah, listen to him,
Totally.
he's director of the school. But he gave a really helpful talk, I thought.
Yeah, and I think that really just highlights that it's not just about intellectual knowledge. It's about the kind of the energy behind perhaps the intuitive thing that the mother has. And I can imagine people kind of saying that's a stereotype, and okay, maybe it is in some ways. And obviously dads have strong intuitions about their kids too, because I have these consults with parents and the dad will say, no, I feel really strongly that we need to approach it this way or that way. So obviously there's both, but it is pretty remarkable the way moms do tend to just take the lead, at least with action and with the direction that they think things need to go. That's pretty fascinating.
I'm conscious now we're coming to the end, and I'm sure we've missed loads of amazing speakers, because there really were some amazing people. Before you jump in, Bev Jackson was very strong on lesbians, and it was really good to hear that. But just special mention to Julia Mason. So many people mentioned her talk.
Yes.
She spoke about the teenage brain, and Julia Mason is from Segum, and she's such a stalwart, but she's a pediatrician, and she's really got a deep understanding of the brain of the child, and the understanding and their capacity to understand at various stages of development. That was another talk, like Alex Capo, that you could take and you could bring and you could give it to somebody and say, watch that, now come back and talk to me.
Yeah. There's two things I just want to highlight, and please know there are so many speakers who were brilliant that we just haven't really gotten to talk about today, but two things. Number one, Helen Joyce gave another brilliant talk. She's just so insightful. She puts things together and sees things that I think most of us find absolutely true and surprising at the same time. She's got a real gift for her intellect. And she gave a lot of very practical strategies about, if you are someone concerned about these issues, here are things to focus on. Here are things not to focus on. And I think that's important because, as you probably know, I tend to be a pretty practical person. I like deep ideas and I like thinking, but I like to be very practical. And there were so many complex and interesting conceptual, cerebral conversations going on that it was so nice to have Helen, who's among the most brilliant of them all, saying, here's what you do, here's what you focus on, and here's how to make headway with this stuff. So I thought that was brilliant. And I have to say, the opening talk by Mia Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
We forgot to talk about that.
Yeah.
She basically says gender dysphoria is an incomplete diagnosis. And her talk was so interesting And over throughout the conference, and of course throughout my work, I have come to think gender dysphoria is not a standalone diagnosis. It's an expression of, a symptom of other things. And Mia just got out of the gate running with this very, very important concept. Of course, she has written the report about the WPATH files, incredibly insightful. And I know you've developed a close relationship with Mia. So talk about that.
Yeah, myself and Mia met as we were organising for the launch of the WPATH files, and we became good friends. I really regard her. I love the way her brain thinks, and she's a natural researcher. She goes into all the details, and she went into the details of the DSM and the diagnosis in general. And, you know, it was kind of a revelation, because sometimes we just run with the criteria. Oh, it's a clinical diagnosis. Do they have gender dysphoria? And it's like, wait, hang on.
Yeah.
What is this? What is this diagnosis? What are we talking about here?
Yes.
I think we lost a lot when we moved from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. I know it's cliche to say it, but I think we lost a lot of understanding of what could be going on for somebody.
Totally.
So, yeah. God, there's so many talks. There's so many speakers, you know what I mean? And it was so lovely. You know, Eliza Mondegreen was very powerful too. And there was so many people who really brought new ideas to the conversation, which felt very shocking, you know. But one thing, just before we go, you know, I did have an extraordinary conversation with some WPATH delegates that, you know, it blew my head off that they were explaining to me. I won't say too much about it, but it just shows what's going on the WPATH gender affirmative kind of side of life, that these were mental health professionals working in Europe, and they have been offered, 15 to 20% commission on giving approvals for surgeries in profit-making private clinics in countries in Europe. So these are private clinics. And, I think, when we do another conference, we'll have to discuss the impact of the private world, the private clinics who are just quietly just kind of, if you can get your paperwork in order, we can do anything for you. You know what I mean? And people like, obviously the people I spoke to hadn't accepted these commissions, but imagine offering commission to a mental health, 15 to 20% commission for mental health approval for surgery that is unnecessary. So that was an extraordinary moment. It happened before the conference started, and it set the tone for me of WPATH have lost their way. They've lost their way so badly, and they really need to, in a way, kind of, I think they need to close up shop. I think they've lost it. I really don't think there's anything left in that organization.
Yeah, when you told me about that, I mean, I had to ask you like many times, like, wait, what are you saying? And I think we start seeing now, I think there was a surgeon here in the US who kind of came out saying he doesn't agree with pediatric gender surgeries. And I mean, I think the surgeons need to jump into this conversation, because there are a lot of, I presume, I'm not a surgeon, but I presume there's a lot of ethical questions to be asked about these procedures. And this is something Helen talked about. She discussed how, gender medicine has the patina of medicine, but rather than curing an illness, it is actually putting people in ill health. And that was a really mind-blowing kind of concept. And I think what you're describing here is an example of how financial incentives easily fit into this gender medicine model, because it's not really about curing an illness. I mean, of course, they've tried to finagle the DSM and the ICD to make it look as though, but it's really complicated. So
she call it tooth fairy science,
tooth fairy medicine or something, tooth fairy research, something like that. Her paper is actually, her talk is up on the Genspect website.
Yeah. She very generously offered to allow us to publish it. She's such an addition. We're so lucky to have her. She really offers insight. And you know what I mean? Where would we be without Ellen Joyce? I shudder to think. Without that book, really. Without everything. Yeah. We're so lucky.
I know. So many. I mean, Chris Kalibi gave an amazing talk too, and he also included a bunch of book recommendations. So I was like furiously scribbling. He's a psychiatrist in Florida. I mean, there were so many brilliant talks from some of our kind of veterans like Helen Joyce and from people who are maybe not necessarily newcomers to the field in the big picture sense, but you know, gender is pretty new. So they may be people that surprise you that you haven't heard of. So I think this is a good place to wrap it. I would just encourage everyone to keep up with the Genspect YouTube and watch some of these amazing presentations.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens.
If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And be sure to visit us on Substack by going to widerlenspod.com. There you can join our listener community, access bonus content and resources, plus learn about additional ways to support the show.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.